years. A couple of months ago, my daughter got engaged. It was a big moment for my wife and me, as you can imagine, one we'd anticipated for many years. It's our oldest child. And it was especially gratifying and fortunate that because we're extremely fond of her now fiance. Now, I tell you this bit of personal news because, of course, that opened up my eye to the wedding industry. I mean, look, let's face it, you don't think about it unless you suddenly are in it. And specifically, the planning phase and the challenges of doing so in the middle of a pandemic. So when a PR agency pitched Dhanusha Sivajee, of the CMO of The Knot, to be on the show, I thought, sure, why not? They must have a B2B thing going on there. And it could be a twofer in that we glean insights for you, and maybe I can pick up some pointers for my daughter. As it turns out, Dhanusha has a fascinating story to tell, one involving the complete disruption of her industry and an extraordinary response in an extraordinary time. So with that tantalizing introduction, welcome, Dhanusha.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
So how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing well,
Okay. And where are you?
I'm currently still in New York. So I'm based out of Westchester in New York. We have a New York office downtown, but I haven't been there since the middle of March.
There you go. Yes, we're all in the work from home mode, and it is just fine. So first, I have to acknowledge that we have a Blue Devil connection, you being a graduate of Duke's Business School. And on that note, I often wonder for the graduate students, do you have the same sort of reaction when you hear UNC that an undergraduate does?
Go to hell, Carolina, go to hell.
There you go. Yes,
and that's coming from an English person that didn't know much beyond Michael Jordan and UNC. But then when I came to the US, it was like, it's on, game on.
It's game on. All right. Thank you for that. Yes, there's a funny story of one of my classmates who actually was able to get the initials of that phrase approved for a license plate. And he created a completely different translation. And by the way, it's a North Carolina license plate.
Oh my goodness.
So hilarious. All right, back to the main story. So you arrived at The Knot in January 2019. Business was booming. Thinking about demographics, you've got all the millennials who are at peak age for weddings, and the average wedding age is about right. So business must have been really good at that moment. What was your mandate?
Our mandate from day one, I've actually been with the Knot Worldwide actually for the last 5 years, but in January of 2019, we actually merged with Wedding Wire. So we now own the number 1 and 2 brands in the US, the Knot and Wedding Wire. And, it was a really great time for us, right? I think this notion of seeing weddings getting that much more personalized, people really, leaning into our apps to help personalize their weddings. So, our big mandate there was, how do we help them with that many more elements of the wedding journey? Previously, we've been very focused on them finding their perfect vendors, right? Their venue, their DJ, their florist. And our big mandate was, how do we lean into some other areas, like they need paper, they need to buy their registry items, and really sort of going on that e-commerce journey together with our couples.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the paper thing, because my daughter, I talked to her this morning about her experience on The Knot, and she said, Dad, they even have special note paper that you need to send to your bridesmaids. It's like everything is thought of already, which...
Oh, I love that. Thank you cards. Yes. I mean, we've had a lot on the spirit of paper. As you can imagine, it used to be save the dates. We've got a lot of change the dates going on right now.
Yeah. And I imagine. So, and what's so cool about your industry versus so many is that there's this just sort of joy. And it's certainly in the planning phase, it's stressful for the people doing it, but the overall occasion, the actual wedding, and so there's this wonderful joy on the horizon, and then there's this stress that sort of leads up to it, I'm imagining. And it sort of must be an interesting place as a brand to be right in the middle of that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting place. I say to my family all the time, family and friends, that I just have the best job in the world, because I'm helping people navigate through some of life's biggest moments together, right? The ones that hopefully they're thinking about for many years to come. So it is such a joyous experience. And I think what we then do with our brand and our product is just make that joyous experience. I mean, just looking at you now, when was the last time you had to organize an event of this size and this scale with that much detail?
Well,
we get to come in and make it easy.
Well, and I think that's really the point is, that you're orchestrating something that hopefully you might only do once in your life. And you had most people come into this are not, experienced event planners. And so they're suddenly confronted with, oh my God, I got to do that. Oh my God, I got to do that. My daughter, by the way, also mentioned the list maker. And
you then got to communicate with your guests. You've got to manage all of those guest communications, and you've got to figure out, do you want a registry? What type of registry? So it's just it's a more complicated process than people, as you say, typically have had to deal with on a personal level, unless they were an event planner. And so we have the joy of coming in and just giving them the expertise to really just simplify that journey. So quite frankly, so they can enjoy that journey, right? Like before, during, and after marriage. We don't want this to be something stressful that then by the end of it, they're like, why the hell did we do this?
Exactly. This was a huge mistake. But going back to 2019, it was a different world. And what, as CMO, what were you thinking about then?
Honestly, at that point, we were thinking about how we can continue to evolve our brand with the pre-engaged audience. So as you can imagine, everybody in the US, we're very lucky to have a brand that's been known for the last 20 years. People know us, they know to sign up, become a member of the Knot or Wedding Wire, and plan their wedding with us. So we were really thinking about ways that we could reach that younger demographic, actually on non-wedding related topics, so that we're sort of top of mind for them. They're thinking about us even before they get engaged. And so, yeah, that was sort of a big mandate for us at the beginning.
So, all right. So, excuse me. So we're going along, we're doing business, we're really well known, we're trying to expand our audience. March 2020.
Yeah, we're like, okay, it's a few weeks. We're back at work, right? Everything, I think at first, just like the rest of the world, you thought it was a couple of days, a couple of weeks max. And then I would say it was really towards the end of March, April, when we started looking at the data and obviously understanding that we were going into lockdown, that we realized a lot of the summer weddings that had been planned were now in jeopardy. So the first thing we did was actually just open up a 24-hour hotline so that brides and vendors could reach out to us and just ask any and all questions, because you can imagine the panic that people feel in terms of this notion of like, oh my God, I've done all of this, now what am I supposed to do? So it was a lot of just guidance and etiquette around what to do immediately. And then obviously a year in, as time has gone on, what we've had to do is really think about what couples need from us. And that has, again, been a lot of guidance on how to manage the journey. So it went from like, hey, just postpone it to the holidays, to now we're seeing a lot of our couples do several events. They're doing something called a mini moni, which is their original wedding date, and maybe doing a smaller wedding, of course, either amongst themselves or with a smaller group of people, depending on their local guidelines. And then what we're also seeing people do is start planning for, post-vaccine world, when they can have a sequel wedding or an anniversary reception, which is essentially how it's been coined in terms of like that big blowout wedding that you can have when it's safe to do so.
So just so you know, I did suggest the idea of a mini moni, but no, we're set for, we have the venues chosen for 2022. Now, we could spend the whole time talking about B2C and the folks that come in to use it to plan it. But a huge part of your business, and this is what really interested me, is B2B. And I've got to imagine in March, April, May, June, all of the companies that are on your website that are putting out there are feeling some pain. And I'm just curious, what kinds of things did you do to sort of engage this audience to help them through?
Yeah, so it's the best part of my job, actually. As much as we get to help couples plan their wedding, the best part of my job, coming from parents who are entrepreneurs at heart, was that we serve 300,000 small business owners around the country in terms of DJs, florists, caterers, etc. And so you can imagine when the pandemic and lockdown went in, they're like, what do we do, right? They've got people management issues, they've got contract issues, budget issues, they've got a million customers calling them at once, trying to reschedule, rethink. So we really had to pivot our whole B2B marketing strategy to one of enhanced education for the 300,000 vendors that we serve across our wedding. We call it the Wedding Pro platform. It's essentially they're coming into our marketplace and then being connected with our couples. So I'd say the strategy was twofold. We knew that a lot of them were going through some financial issues, obviously with cash flow being a problem, given that a lot of weddings were being canceled or postponed. Postponement was the big thing, really. We've only seen about 5% of weddings actually being canceled, but again, people had been moving their wedding dates out. So one of the big things we did was launch a vendor assistance program. So it was a $10 million fund to help our advertising vendors, partners who were most in need. And then, as I mentioned, the bigger part was really just bringing the community together to share best practices. A lot of them didn't have access to what was going on with PPP, didn't know what to do with furloughing their employees. And so we just wanted to, we felt it was our responsibility to just come in and share whatever expertise and knowledge we had, either directly or indirectly through some of our bigger partners.
So you say it now in retrospect with such ease that we had our own PPP-like program where we assisted with $10 million. Let's step back a second and just talk about the decision-making process that got you there, because not every company that's in the industries that like yours, where they were really hurt, actually did put some money where their mouth is and really tried to help their customer. And I'm curious, how long did it take for you all to figure it out? How did you decide how to talk about that?
Yeah, it took us, I'd want to say about 6 weeks from start to finish, because you can imagine it's conceiving of the plan, getting the dollars approved, then figuring out how we're going to distribute the dollars. So it was a combination of our sales teams, marketing teams, and then operation teams, as you can imagine, like all of that flowing through our system. The decision-making process was relatively easy in that we knew we wanted to do it, right? So sort of our executive team coming together and sort of saying, look, at the core of what we do, we are a two-sided marketplace, and we are nothing without our amazing and creative vendors. And when we think about our wedding pros who have chosen this profession, they've been with us through thick and thin over the last 20 years. And so it was important for us to make sure that we were there for them during the times where they were struggling the most. And like I said, we actually thought a lot. We brought in we have a brand ambassador program. So we have about 60 pros that represent the industry that we talk to on a weekly, monthly basis. Pretty honest dialogue about what we're doing well, what we're not doing so well. And so they were a big part of that decision-making process as well. We wanted to just hear from our advertisers in terms of what, outside of dollars, what else could we be doing for them? And that's where we actually found out that they were just really lacking in resources in terms of how to handle HR and legal matters, right? They're not these huge corporations that have access to what's going on in policy and how to handle. So we put together very quickly, that probably the education program came together in 2 weeks in terms of finding experts that could speak to different topics, both on these general HR and legal matters, but then also very COVID-specific matters. Health and safety guidelines, what's going on state by state. We were able to just pull that information readily for our vendors. So they had that, and we just wanted to be a trusted source for them during these times, even though it was not what we had planned to do at the beginning of 2020. That's for sure. The content that we were writing and the education we were pulling together was not exactly what we had thought at the beginning of the year.
So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into some of the things that you've just mentioned, because again, I think there's a lot of strategic thinking and insights that go into this. And it is a fundamental part of a larger strategy of what to do in a downturn, particularly this one. So stay with us. Hey, it's Drew, and I just wanted to do a quick mention of a new program. I'm going to call it a peer-to-peer advisory network called CMO Huddles. And I just ask you, if you're a CMO, B2B CMO, and you wish you could talk to some of the smartest peers in the industry, just go to cmohuddles.com and check it out. And there's a little link on it where you can book a time with me to talk to see whether or not CMO Huddles could be something that you would find of value. One thing I will tell you about it is that we bring together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. So check it out, cmohuddles.com. Okay, we're back. And Dhanusha, you mentioned a brand ambassador program where you have 60 folks that you talk about. Let's go into that a little bit more detail. How formalized is it, and how often do you meet with them, and what's the structure?
Yeah, so it's a pretty formal program. We pulled it together. I want to say we've had one for the last 5 years. We keep evolving it. We want to make sure that it's representative of all of the different small businesses out there. As you can imagine, the wedding industry is quite diverse, not just in the types of people that enter it, but also just in the different types of careers, right? A florist versus a venue versus a DJ. And so we just make sure we're bringing in folks that have a lot of thought leadership and expertise who are members of their community. It was really important to us. We view ourselves not just as a platform that is an advertising platform, but also a platform that's bringing together this amazing community that, I've been part of a lot of B2B communities. I'll tell you the wedding pros and know how to have a good time, but also know, are really there for each other. They've got each other's backs. And so that's why it felt right and very authentic to us to create this B2B program and this ambassador program. My team meets with them on a regular basis, once every couple of weeks. We also pull together hot topic. As you can imagine, during COVID, we were meeting probably more than we were talking to them pretty much every day in terms of what was going on and what they basically are sort of pulse on what's going on with the community at large.
And are they a source? So I'm wondering, because I believe that having a resource like this is for a brand. First of all, it's awesome to have a community because that means they care about your brand and you mean a lot to them. And I certainly know that a good review on the Knot of your brand is really important because if you get a bad review, that costs them a lot of business. So I imagine these folks have a vested interest in your success and their success on your platform. So participating is probably a big deal, but I'm curious, like, do you share ad ideas with them? Do you share, how far does it go in terms of the information that you seek
Yes,
from them?
it goes all the way down to sharing product features, functionalities. As you know, we're obviously bringing couples in to meet with pros, and then there's a lot of communication between couples and pros that happens on our platform. So anytime we're launching new features, during COVID, there was video chats that we put in place. There was concierge bots that we put in place to help you. Since you couldn't go offline to meet with vendors, you could actually get recommendations sitting in your living room through a virtual concierge. And so they serve as our first line of defense on feedback on feature functionality. They also serve, as you can imagine, there's just so much communication that goes out, on a regular B2B marketing platform, but during COVID, so much more. So they also serve as a nuanced way for us to kind of customize our communications to different groups of our pros as well.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that portion. If you don't have an advisory board, a customer advisory board, I think it's just for a B2B brand, you've got to do it. I mean, it is so important for so many different reasons. And right now, and this allows me to talk a little bit on what were the strategies that actually worked during COVID and continue to work. And so first, foremost, if you were lucky enough to be in this world that I call essential, then they needed you no matter what. Like you're a cloud-based service. But if you're not in essential world where your product right now can make a difference, you need to do something that makes you essential, right? You need to do something that helps your customers. And I know that a lot of B2B brands did well in 2020 because they just leaned into their customers and said, how can we help you? What can we do? Are you using our product as well? And many of them, like you, created products. And I think that's so important, is the ability in a very short period of time to say, market change, needs change, we better address those changes. And so I'm so impressed with the speed at which you were able to get some of these new products in place. Was your team a little stressed out?
Definitely the front lines were stressed out. But I think what I love about our team, across the board, marketing, product, sales, is they've always got that customer front and center. So as much as they were stressed out, I think they realized that was a fraction of the stress that our small business partners were feeling. And so I think just a sense of duty and responsibility to that community that has, been so strong and will continue to be strong was the thing that really drove us. Because they were being impacted in a much more direct way than we were.
Now, I think I recall when we had our prep in our prep conversation, you mentioned sort of the organizational purpose and values and how those helped inform some of your actions. Am I making that up, or did we actually have that
I
conversation?
don't know if we had that conversation, but I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, we definitely are a values-based company, and doing the right thing by all of our stakeholders, right? Internal, external, is something that we've, held near and dear to our hearts through both companies being separate, and then, obviously coming together as the Knot and Wedding Wire 2 years ago. But yeah, this notion of just really wanting to help our users, our couples and our small business partners, was definitely something that, that was every stand up. We used to do stand ups every single morning, right? And then check-ins in the afternoon, and then an end of day check-in. So you imagine you're rolling out so many new features, so many new programs, the sort of cross collaboration that happens normally, but it would sort of be a meeting here and there, right, throughout the week. We didn't have the time. We didn't have the luxury of like, oh, it's going to be, let's meet on this next week. Like, we were rolling things out like literally on a weekly basis in terms of new features and functionality.
And I imagine, though, that despite all of these efforts, it was a hard year. I mean, if anything is postponed, that means revenue doesn't get in the door. Your business partners, those 300,000 companies, little companies, couldn't have made as much money as they did in 2019. I mean, it must have been really hard for the industry.
It was really hard for the industry. They were very cash strapped, as you can imagine. So we said, while people were not canceling, they were doing, I think this year we're going to see a lot of that pent up demand come to fruition, which is, I think, going to be great for the industry. It's similar to how you think about the 1918 pandemic and then the roaring 20s that came after it. Everyone was like, right, we're going out, we're celebrating big. So we know that that's coming for our small business partners, but for us, we wanted to be there for them during that crucial time when there was a cash flow issue for some of them. And so that was when we launched our vendor assistance program.
And did you exhaust the fund?
For the most part, yes. We've still got some dollars that we're using, but really it was during that time when they really needed it the most. That's how we've been operating.
And so did anything, I mean, I'm just curious if any, because here these folks are that all their income has been pushed off from 2020 to 2021, if not 2022. I mean, just staying open, right, is I guess I'm imagining that a lot of these venues just had to lay people off and just try to keep bare minimum to stay alive.
Yeah, I think the industry was lucky. We really, you know how it was during the beginning of PPP. It was like that mad rush. So we just made sure that we got them a lot of access to information quickly, because, information is power. And so part of this was not just our vendor assistance program, but just making sure we were keeping them apprised of what was happening with government and PPP. The other thing that we saw happen, as I touched upon earlier, was this notion that we just saw a lot of change in the industry, right? So people weren't canceling, as you said, they were postponing some of their bigger weddings, but we saw this huge influx in people doing mini monies. And so then it was working with our vendors on creating new pricing and packaging for these new types of format weddings. So there were smaller weddings where there was a virtual component, but they'd still need a caterer, they still need video and photography. We also saw people do a lot of what we were calling shift weddings, where they were bringing people into venues. So they kept the same day, but they would just bring people in different shifts. So there was the, hey, let's do our college friend shift. Let's do our, immediate family shift. Let's do our, and so what we actually found that were a lot of our pros, we partnered with them to just educate around new formats and pricing so that we could, they could actually continue to work over the, the course of last year. So that was something really interesting that came about through all of this. While we saw there were a lot of postponements, there were a lot of smaller, more intimate ceremonies that happened last year while people postponed the larger wedding.
So it's so interesting, and I'm trying to find a parallel in other industries, because you really helped them redefine what it is that they were offering to their customers, which is very different than most. Think of a software company. They go in and say, use Microsoft Office. Microsoft Office doesn't come in and say, oh, by the way, Renegade, if you used Word this way a little bit better, maybe you would have this, right? I mean, there are folks like I can think of Marketo or MailChimp, or folks that help me use email. They give me information, but you're telling them, and you gave them
an experience.
Yeah. Really how to bundle, how to reshape their company.
And that's really where the brand ambassadors came into, right? Because they obviously have their, ear to the ground across different markets and different verticals. So it was really this, as you can imagine, it was like just daily influx of information coming in about best practices, what to do, some of the pitfalls. And then it was turning around, packaging that up into blog content, into webinars, into content that we had to also then put out to the other side of the marketplace. So as you said, it was like rethinking what, how our vendors had to operate, but then it was also doing education to the other side so that when they came together, their expectation was like, oh, that's what you do. Because we also have a lot of couples coming to us saying, well, what should we do? So it's like you get to sort of be a thought leader and shape demand, but you have to do it in partnership with both sides, which was pretty fascinating to do. Like you said, we do that on an ongoing basis, but to do it on this scale and be such a change agent as part of these two sides of the marketplace was pretty intense.
It is, and I love it. I'm sort of as I think I mentioned, I'm trying to wrap up my book, and as you talk, part of this is, you are cultivating customer champions, and you are doing something which is chapter 9, which is called selling through service. In other words, all your energy went into helping these companies with your content and your programs survive right now and thrive later. That meant really having them rethink their business. And you were in a unique position. And I think companies underestimate how much they know about the category and how helpful they can be. They're so busy thinking about how do I sell my speeds and feeds that they don't think enough about how can I help my customers grow, right?
Yeah.
We're going to take another break. When we come back, we're just going to keep going down this amazing journey that you've been on. All right, so stay with us. Okay, we're back. And we've been talking about this notion of selling through service, about how, as a marketer, and it's, to me, this was really important in the COVID pandemic period, but I really see this as a philosophical thing that can carry you forward. I've got to believe, and you probably have brand tracking to prove this, that your 300,000 merchants and small businesses feel better about you than they did maybe even pre-pandemic. Have you tracked how they feel about your brand?
We do. So we run a brand equity study twice a year, both with our couple cohorts and then also with our small business partners. And with a metric, we obviously track a lot of different metrics, but the one that we were really focused on during COVID was a brand that I trust. And so for us, that actually went up double digits when we looked at, we obviously did a track at the beginning of January, our standard tracker. And then when we remeasured again, we tooled again at the end of last year, that had gone up double digits. And that was great for us because that for us is a testament to the fact that, as you say, managing through service, worrying less about how much are you paying us, why this is a great product, how many leads are you going to get, which by the way, they're all there. But during times like this, it's really about those additional value add service areas, whether it's in the form of education, access to other pros. We found that our community just learned so much, not just, I don't want to take credit for like all the education we put out, because that really came from so many different sources, but also being a platform to bring them together to have some of those discussions, right? We found a lot of pros coming together and saying, hey, I've had this client come in, they want X, Y, and Z. I can't take that because I'm already filled. Do you want to take that minimony, et cetera, et cetera.
So I want to go back to the brand tracking and the trust metric. So I know it's important. I've been marketing a long time. How does that, in your mind, if you're going to your board of directors and you say, hey, our trust metric is up double digits, what do they say? Because, trust doesn't necessarily translate into revenue. How do you how did you pick that metric as being the primary metric? I mean, I know why, but I'm curious how that plays out.
As you know, you're sort of doing these brand trackers and then you're monitoring the equity measures that actually drive consideration, right? And so for us, we have a very clear handle on which brand attributes, while we measure a lot of them, are the drivers of consideration for advertising with our platform and being partners with us. And so that's a metric, especially for us as leaders in the space. We never want to be complacent, right? There are always people that come in, different, other niche players that may come in and want to offer up a service. And so the brand I trust is one that we know to be a driver of consideration and purchase.
Well, and I say that, and I ask that question because we know as marketers that trust is everything,
Yeah.
right? Trust is the difference between a brand and a generic, right? Brand is trust. And if you gain trust, and it's very hard to gain trust, and I'm trying to imagine in this time frame where, gosh, I mean, again, the pain is palpable. That was probably, in many ways, the only metric that you could really look at and say the one that matters, right? In the last 12 months, I would say, without argument. But again, that may there are other people in bean counters that go, yeah, that's fine. But what's our lead count?
Well, it's interestingly enough, that was the driving force, right? As you said, that service mentality to do whatever it took to help our pros during this time, I think is one that we didn't suddenly, going back to the point of values, it wasn't something that we suddenly were like, hey, we do this, right? Like we do that on a regular basis. It's part of our values. It just had that much more meaning during during this pandemic. So I think the focus for us was on that trust metric, but we actually did see a lot of our sort of mid-funnel metrics in terms of traffic to blogs, webinars. It was like, 5, 10x what it typically is. And again, I think it's coming off of the trust, but also this notion that we just, people really needed that content at that time. And so sort of that mid-funnel sort of lead generation for us actually came off of building that trust, which was sort of an unexpected for us, right? Because we started with like, we're just going to do this because we think people need it, but we hadn't really set goals for like, and we want this much, engagement, this much reach. Like all those metrics went out of the doors, quite frankly, when COVID came in. It was like, we just need to reconfigure everything that we're doing.
It's music to my ears, and there's occasionally you will meet, and I actually just finished this chapter. You will meet a marketer who will say, "Only do things that you can measure," and everything should be about revenue, as if you could draw a direct line. But here was this moment where you needed to show your category that you cared, because you did, and they needed to sort of feel it and see it. And you couldn't just run ads that say, hey, we care. You had to do something, right? You had to actually take actions and do things that would actually impact those folks in a way that they could actually understand, take advantage of in the short term while waiting through this sort of long, prolonged slowdown. So as we go back to that, so one, thank you for saying that you didn't know for sure that it would impact those things, but you did it because it was the right thing to do. And it was sort of stemmed from the brand values, and the marketplace needed it.
Yeah.
But you didn't know if it would drive brand.
We didn't know it was going to go brand. We didn't know if people were going to want to read our content, want to engage with each other, turn up to webinars. You touched on the point of trust earlier, and I think trust is when your words and your actions meet, right, and they map. And I think for me, that's what's really important. Like we could all be out there sort of saying, here's our brand values, here's our purpose, but if our actions don't map back to that or back that up, I think over time your customers, they feel that, they know that, and that will come through in your numbers and revenue in the long term.
I'm reminded of a couple of things. One, I heard in one CMO was talking about, this was back in June of last year. And she said, the more information we gave away, the more our sales went up. It was like, and it wasn't they were trying to do it because of trying to drive sales. They were doing it again because it was the right thing to do in the moment. And there's enlightened self-interest. I'm all for that. But this notion that you should be all sales all the time and just be thinking about, all right, what's that click-through rate, and how's this going to translate, and how are we going to get that?
And what's the MQLs on that webinar you're doing, right? And like I said, those numbers all actually ended up going up, but not because we had sat there and said, right, we're going to do this webinar because we're trying to increase our MQLs by 20%.
No, right? You didn't have any objectives for them at all, other than if somebody comes to this and they get value out of it and we've helped them, maybe that'll show up in the trust metrics.
Right. And we had this was new for so many people that we just had a lot of new prospects turn up, right? So there's a lot of new, again, we didn't know that. We were just like, we're the, industry standard. We're there. This is our expectation. We need to help our client base.
Wow. Boy. So were there any other metrics that in your brand tracking, because I know one of the things that startles me is that of the 133 B2B CMOs that we surveyed for both in 2019 and 2020, less than 20% of them actually had a brand health or brand tracking study in place. Obviously, you're a bigger brand than some of these, and you have a consumer element which changes the formula a bit. But can you talk a little bit about any other metrics that sort of were important in the brand health?
Yeah, so our consumer base or our B2B, vendor base, much like other industries, is made up of a cohort of people who are very established in the industry, right? They've been doing this for a decade or longer. But we are seeing in the wedding industry this new cohort, people coming in, they've been in the industry less than a couple of years, they're creatives by trade, aren't necessarily getting into this for the business side or the marketing side, right? They just love what they do. They want to be a DJ, they want to bake cakes. And so one of the metrics we saw go up this past year was actually just, this is a brand for me with that new cohort, that younger generation, we call them newbies, right? And again, I think that was because here they are in this new industry, COVID hit, and they were like, not only just did they need the 101 type education that we're putting out for any new entrants into this industry, but they needed this information even more in terms of people management, financial management, how do I manage through crisis?
In many ways, it's funny. You are to the wedding industry. Gosh, I'm blanking on the web. That Shopify is to sort of startup e-commerce. In many ways, you help these companies get off the ground.
Yes.
And
exactly.
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I, for one, is this a brand for me? Am grateful that you have the sorting capability for venues under affordable. I'm most grateful for that.
Where are you planning your daughter's wedding?
Well, I'm not actually going to tell the venue, but she did pick a venue yesterday, secured a date for May 2022. We're very excited about that. And but I'm telling you, literally, she could, the minute I said, hey, I'm talking to the CMO of the night, she said, oh my gosh, thank her immensely. 5 times a week, she figured she was on the site. And she knows now there's all sorts of other things. She's probably going to have a wedding planner, but there's all sorts of other things that the knot has brought up to her that she goes, oh my God, koozies for my wedding party. Perfect.
Exactly. Why not?
Why not?
Like I said, it's a pleasure to be able to help people through these like fun, intricate journeys. And then you'd also mentioned, Drew, just the idea of just doing the right thing by our pros. One other thing that, obviously last year was all about COVID, but we also had, a lot of racial, social injustice going on in the world. And that was just a really interesting time for us as well. I wasn't sure if you were wanting to chat a little bit about that too.
Yeah, please do. Yes. Tell me how.
No, I mean, I was just thinking about it even before we joined, because I mean, you and I spent a lot of time talking about COVID and the impact, but just with that, and then we've, again, going back to this idea of doing the right thing, we've always fought for marriage equality, for, pros, no matter their sex, their religion, being able to, enter the industry. But unfortunately, we know that there's just a discrepancy, right, in terms of Black and other underrepresented groups being able to get the financing, the education and networking that they need to become pros in this industry, on any industry. And so the thing that we've been working on for the last couple of months and just launched yesterday actually is a program called Fellowship for Change, where we're going to be giving financial assistance, mentorship, and networking opportunities for Black and other underrepresented groups to be able to get their foothold into the industry. So anyone that's been in the industry for a couple of years or just about to start, we've got our brand ambassador program and a bunch of other judges that will be part of selecting that new group of fellows. And then we'll be putting them through a 8-month, a year-long program to really get them, just give them a chance in this industry. I think, again, going back to like, what's our responsibility? Of course, we're there to help you get leads, help you, get customers and all that stuff. But we just, want to think about the long term, how we can really impact and change the industry for the better.
Thank you for sharing that. We'll link to that website or that page on your website in the show notes for those folks who are jogging right now, listening to the show. I know Sunny Ganuli, who was, I think, the CEO or very senior person at Wedding Wire. And I remember talking to him years ago about how they actually turned down business because that business insisted on some policies that didn't make sense, that weren't aligned with the values of the organization. So I suspect that was a good match for you all.
Yes. Sonny's now involved in our international business, so he's still with us. He was part of Wedding Wire, was part of the Knot, and now we're the Knot Worldwide. So yeah, I mean, that was a great thing about bringing those two brands together. The cultures were very similar in terms of doing the right thing and really trying to empower our couples and our pros.
Nice. All right. Well, this has been a terrific and timely conversation. Thank you so much. I wonder if, as you were thinking ahead for B2B CMOs who are thinking about building a stronger, more meaningful content program in 2021, maybe you could give them 2 do's and a don't.
Okay, cool. I think the 2 do's is make sure, and we touched upon this earlier, make sure you do put together a brand advocacy group, a group of ambassadors that can help you think about the topics that you want to create. Don't think you have to do it by yourself. Lean into them for that content creation. The other do would be to don't be afraid. I guess it's a don't. Don't be afraid of being the thought leader. There are a lot of topics that we put out there that we're like, ooh, is this the right time? Some people may not like it. Is it going to be relevant? But I think you need to sort of go to where the puck is, or where it's going. Is that the American phrase?
That's the hockey phrase. That's Wayne Gretzky. He's probably Canadian.
Oh, there you go, Canadians. They're trying. But this notion of, for us, right, sustainability, using technology in weddings, multiculturalism, something we've been talking about for the last couple of years. Topics that people might have scratched their head and be like, is this really relevant for our audience right now? But you just want to stay ahead of the curve.
Awesome. All right. Well, Dhanusha, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and keep me posted on your daughter's wedding.
I will definitely do that. All right. Thank you all for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes for the things that Dhanusha mentioned. Renegade Thinkers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Hey, that's me. Audio production is by Sam Beck. Show notes are written by Melissa Caffrey. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, or learn more about quite possibly the savviest B2B marketing agency in New York City, visit renegade.com. And until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.